After playing Mass Effect 2, which many claim to be the best in the series, I didn't know what to expect when going into Mass Effect 3. Many times when playing franchises that have a trilogy, usually the third game is not the best in the series, but for some reason, I had a gut feeling that I would like 3 more than 2 just because of the jump in gameplay from 1 to 2, so I was expecting the same jump from 2 to 3, and I was right. The gameplay for Mass Effect 3 is what makes this better than the other two games. Yes, at its core, the gameplay for Mass Effect is all the same. You're just running and shooting people in different areas and locations, but it's when you look deeper that you see the differences. One of the first things I noticed when playing this was the unlimited sprint. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you've got enemies surrounding you on all sides, it's extremely convenient to be able to run for as long as I wanted. There were so many times that I was on the verge of death, only to survive by running away. This is something that I wanted so bad in the second game, but it was nice to see that finally implemented in this third title. As I've already said, the gunplay is the same, but for some reason in 3, it feels better. Everything from aiming, shooting, to using powers all felt really good. If you've played any Mass Effect game, then you know that the movement is janky. However, this time around I thought it didn't hamper the gameplay as much as it did before. Throughout my playthrough, I wasn't running into obstacles and getting killed because I couldn't execute the movements as I wanted to, but instead, I was able to get into cover quickly and then shoot away. So many times in 2, I would try to perform a movement and do something only to get stuck or kind of stutter and end up dying. Frustrating stuff. When shooting the enemies, the aiming felt really good and natural. It wasn't as slow and stagnant as it was before. And the crazy thing is, you wouldn't be able to tell that from just watching the gameplay. This is one of those situations where you need to actually have the controller in your hands for you to notice the difference, since visually it all looks the same. One of my favorite aspects of aiming was using the sniper. The sniper has always been one of my favorite weapons, but using it in this game was extremely satisfying. Hopping in and out of aiming was seamless, making me want to use that weapon more than I was before. And this is the same for all the weapons. Using them in the actual gameplay just felt good. Using the powers felt like you were performing an actual combo instead of it being segmented from the other weapons. Before in 2, I leaned more into the guns and didn't use the powers in much, but in 3, I used them a lot more. It was so cool to be shooting an enemy and then switch and use a power right after. Let me give you an example. So there was moments where I would not see an enemy creep up right next to me and end up getting some hits in. When I was in these situations, I would use a power to slam that opponent into another area and then hop right back into shooting. Performing all of this was really fast and could be done with just a simple input, making it addicting to do during the fights. Take this concept and apply it to the other squad members and your team will be functioning at peak performance. Staying on the topic of gunplay, I thought this game went above and beyond when it came to weapon variety. There are so many weapons for every type of gun, it's actually insane. Between the snipers, pistols, SMGs, rifles, and shotguns, there's an endless amount of guns that you can add to your loadout. And what's great is that these are not all stored at the same place. You can buy weapons from stores on the Normandy, stores on the Citadel, or you'll find them as you progress through the missions. Once you do get these weapons, you may not stay with them for long, as there's always a better weapon available somewhere. During my playthrough, I mainly used the Maddox 5 and Wraith 5, which were SMG and shotgun fully upgraded. I didn't even mention that you could upgrade these weapons. Yeah, after acquiring a gun, you could then go back onto your ship and upgrade it by spending money to increase its stats, making it stronger. You could upgrade it up to 5 times to its highest level after you first acquire it. This makes a huge difference because the enemies get stronger as you get further in the game, which is to be expected. But then this game adds the cherry on top to this entire system: weapon mods. Just like the actual weapons, you can find weapon mods across the planets or buy them from individual stores. These are like the final touch you would add on to your upgraded weapons. These range from increased damage, boosted melee damage, bullet penetration, reduced weight capacity, among other notable stat upgrades. Knowing what these are and adding them to your weapon can make your gun OP. Now I played on normal difficulty, but when using my shotgun upgraded to the max, along with the damage mods, I would one-shot almost every normal enemy and shred through many of the tougher ones. These mods really do make a difference. It couldn't possibly get any better, right? It actually does. You can take everything that I just mentioned and apply them to your squad members as well. So all of the guns and mods that you acquire don't have to be exclusively yours, but instead, you can add them to your teammates' weapons, making them just as strong. Want Garrus to have an OP sniper? Want Liara to have an unstoppable pistol? You can make that happen without having to sacrifice anything in your specific loadout. This entire weapon system was done so well, it makes the gunplay better than the other two games by a large margin. Now I've gone into the weapons, but I haven't talked about the powers as much. Just like before, you would unlock powers for each character by upgrading to certain stats. Upgrading everything felt closer to how it was in 1, with more options to choose from, but with a slight twist. After choosing to upgrade a power, you are taken to a second screen where the upgrades go a little bit further in depth. I loved this as it gave me more control of what about the power I wanted to upgrade rather than just doing a simple power boost. So for example, if I wanted to upgrade something for Shepard, and I put some points into a specific power, I then could choose between 2 upgrades within the upgrade to give myself a boost in an area that I preferred instead of the game picking for me. Many of these were between health regeneration, weapon damage, power regeneration speed, among other upgrades. Picking these depends completely on how you want that character to play and the type of gamer you are. Don't worry if you make a mistake and upgrade something you didn't want to, as you can undo dispersed talent points by simply pressing a button, which is a welcome change considering in 2 you had to go to a separate area to do the same thing. Between the weapons and powers, you can make Shepard and each squad member play exactly how you want them to play, with them leaning into their strengths and you protecting their weaknesses so you can approach each mission with the most optimized squad members possible. Of course, the gameplay isn't all perfect as there were some things that I just didn't care for, the most obvious being the inclusion of the Reapers during the planet exploration. Just like before, you could travel from planet to planet within systems and scour them for war assets, which I'll explain later. When searching these systems, you would need to scan each planet, but when doing so, it would send out a signal to Reapers who would eventually find you and take your ship down if they caught up with you. At first, it seems like a good concept, but after a couple times, it's like, alright bro, can I just look for stuff in peace? Especially when there's so many planets and systems, I wasn't trying to be bombarded with Reapers every couple minutes, just because I wanted to get more war assets. I think they should have just kept it how it was in 2, where you could freely explore everything without any intrusions. It was more peaceful and more enjoyable, but maybe because the Reapers are such a big threat in 3, that was the whole point. But let's move on. Another thing that annoyed the hell out of me were the placement of the grenades. So many times during the encounters I would be sitting behind cover trying to avoid gunfire when a grenade would appear right next to me out of nowhere. Like the enemy could be way across the entire area and just lob this nade and then bam, it would be right next to you. At first, I thought maybe I was just sitting in a bad spot, but after enough encounters, it became apparent that this was by design. These grenades landed in the perfect spot every single time. It's actually ridiculous. And if you're wondering, I did die to these grenades many times. It sort of reminds you of in the Uncharted games where the enemies in that would throw their grenades in the exact location you were hiding. It's just an annoying design choice. Now a minute ago I mentioned war assets, and these are specific to this game. To put it simply, they're exactly what you think they are. They're assets that you can acquire to use in the war against the Reapers, the antagonists of the game. However, getting these is not as easy as you might think. Collecting these can be done by probing planets, finishing missions, or doing side quests. In the middle of the Normandy, there is a tracker that fills up as you collect more and more assets, with a marker indicating the minimum amount that you need. More importantly, these war assets have an impact on the ending of the story, which I'll discuss later. But in regards to the gameplay, collecting these war assets was a neat incentive to make the player do more in the actual game. For a game with so many side quests to do and planets to probe, knowing that completing these gives you war assets that will help you with the final battles is all the motivation I needed to try and get as many as possible. By the time my playthrough ended, I was only a couple hundred off from having the max war assets possible, something I wish I would have achieved, but I digress. The main missions themselves in 3 were so much more fleshed out and dynamic than the previous games. It didn't matter what planet you were on or who you were with, these missions were full of spectacle and intrigue, making them memorable for a variety of reasons. There were so many times I found myself like, yo, or this mission was crazy over the course of the game. It's like every single mission was something different but had the same level of peak, and no matter what mission you were doing, everything connected back to the overall goal of defeating the Reapers, which was nice. When you combine everything I already mentioned into these missions, every time I started one, I didn't know what to expect, but also knew that it was going to be a lot of fun. Even if the goal is to save a certain person, blow something up, or find an important item, what happens in between makes these missions an absolute treat. Outside of one mission where all you're doing is shooting squares, there wasn't any missions that I got tired of playing. In its entirety, the gameplay for Mass Effect 3 is what sets it apart from the previous 2 games. Pretty much everything is done better than it was before outside of a couple minor things, but for the most part, this gameplay will have you coming back for more and wishing there were more main missions because it really is that fun.
Just make it right, soldier.
Look out! Commander!
Focus on the bomb. We'll handle Cerberus.
The story in Mass Effect 3 is the culmination of everything that was established from the first. It's set in 2186 as Shepard and company try to stop the Reapers, a machine race of synthetic organic starships that destroy all civilization every 50,000 years. As you can expect, there's no way that Shepard can do this alone, so we set out to assemble an entire army alongside a weapon that can finally destroy these enemies. This is where the war assets I mentioned earlier come into play. As you progress throughout the story, you'll gain war assets which pretty much add to your army. This is woven into the story as the interactions you have with different races across the planets all have different levels of assets. Like when dealing with the Krogan, it's a no-brainer that you want their help as they're known for their destruction in battle. This translates to the war assets as you can see the different values that the various Krogan war assets provide to our cause. Take that and apply it to all these different races and situations, and this is how your army is built. The story does a great job at always stressing the necessity of these war assets and just how important they are to defeating the Reapers. Now compared to the last game, I think the Reapers are a much better villain as their impact is made known right from the intro. These guys are absolutely devastating and don't play around at all. Trying to take one of these things down is like a monumental task, something that almost seems impossible. However, when you do take a Reaper ship down, it feels so good, almost like it shouldn't have happened. What makes it worse is that they have this terrifying noise that they make at the most inopportune times. Like I'll be going through battle and then I hear all of a sudden. It doesn't seem like much when you hear it, but during actual gameplay, it's more scary than you might realize. The Reaper's presence is felt not only on the planets, but during dialogue between literally anybody. So many times you're trying to plead your case with others and they don't want to hear any of it because they think it's pointless to fight back against the Reapers. In a nutshell, the Reapers are the biggest and most ominous threat in the series up to this third installment. Now I didn't mention this earlier, but the dialogue options do return with the same choices between Renegade or Paragon. If you don't know, that's pretty much a good or bad option. What I liked about this game is how the decisions didn't always correlate with someone dying. One of my biggest gripes in 2 was that it felt like the game was almost rigged for you to get people killed. Like the game was intentionally made for you not to save anyone. It was ridiculous. But this time around, these choices and their consequences weren't always so immediate. Instead, the accumulation of these choices will influence how certain events go later on in the story. So like because you chose one option, a certain character didn't die right then and there, but might die later on in the same mission or afterwards. I like this change up because your choices still had consequences, but when people died, it felt more organic and authentic. The story is always going to head in a certain direction, but having the choice to determine how a lot of that leads up to that moment is so cool. So as you progress along in the story, the decisions you made in the past 2 games are felt early and often. If you got a lot of people killed before, then you'll be able to tell when interacting with the different races or trying to acquire various war assets. Things will just go differently. For me, I didn't get anybody killed in 1 or 2, so by the time 3 came around, I reunited with all the familiar faces from my past. This made the story hit on an entirely different level. Joining forces with people you have history with made the fight against the Reapers so much more personal. It just made my experience that much better. Now regarding the ending, I know that upon release of the OG version there was some controversy surrounding it, but with my playthrough being on the Legendary Edition, I'll just give my thoughts with that in mind. Here's a spoiler alert if you would like to skip this part of the video to another section if you haven't played this already. At the end of the game, you have a handful of choices that would decide the fate of the universe. Even if you're watching this portion, I won't show the actual footage of my playthrough going through this just to be safe, but you have a couple of choices between control, destroy, synthesis, or refusal. It took me so long to decide on what route I wanted to take. I was literally sitting at my desk just staring at the screen because I couldn't decide. I was pretty much in choice paralysis. After about 20 minutes of thinking, I ended up going with synthesis, which would kill my Shepard but make both the organics and synthetics perfect beings, eliminating the fighting and stopping the never-ending cycle of battles that have been going on for all of time. I thought this was the best ending you could get on a blind playthrough without looking anything up, as even though not everyone got exactly what they wanted, this had the least number of casualties and nobody's sacrifice was in vain. It stopped the continuous fighting and ensured everlasting peace. We just had to sacrifice ourselves in order to do so, which sucks. But after watching a friend of mine's playthrough, I saw something I could have only known if I looked it up. So by having all the war assets in the game and then choosing destroy, you not only destroy the Reapers, destroying synthetics in the process, but still save the universe, which was the original goal from the start. The most important thing about this decision is that your version of Shepard does indeed survive, even though everyone thinks you're dead. If I would have known all this from the start, I would have tried to get every single war asset as I was very close to having them all anyways, especially because I wanted to save Shepard. But I'm still satisfied with the ending that I got. Now that we're out of spoiler territory, I think that when Mass Effect 4 releases that it should be easy but tedious to get the best ending, assuming BioWare chooses to have multiple endings. There's no way that a person is going to know that you need all war assets and to choose a certain option to save Shepard. I don't know how you would address it, but there's gotta be a way to make it easier to get the best ending, but still make it a challenge to actually obtain. It's hard to describe, but so many times over this series, decisions and their consequences are so ambiguous that it essentially punishes the player for not knowing beforehand, which you're not going to on the first playthrough. Regardless, the story for Mass Effect 3 is incredible and ends this trilogy in a way that you may or may not be satisfied with. It's worth noting that, as far as I know of, there isn't a confirmed canon ending, so whatever ending you do get, it's okay if it's not good, because it doesn't count technically. I loved going through this story, and I'm definitely going to go for a Paragon run sometime in the future.
Commander! Excuse me. Sorry. Ninth business. Commander, this is urgent!
I don't think that's the umbrella lady.
Commander Shepard, I'm Staff Analyst Maya Brooks. Alliance Intelligence. There are people trying to kill you.
Now there's no way that I could talk about this game and not mention the DLC. Since the Legendary Edition comes with all the DLCs, the ones in 3 were insane. These are easily the best DLCs in the entire series. These missions were lengthy and surpassed what you did in the actual main missions of the base game. All of them were so much fun and added so much more to this game, even though this game already had a bunch of content to begin with. However, out of all the DLCs, the mission on the Citadel where you start searching around Captain Anderson's apartment may be the best mission in all of Mass Effect. You start out in his apartment, then try to take a break and go on vacation, only to be attacked by mysterious enemies that we haven't seen before. All of this seemed like it was taken right out of a movie. Then it gets even crazier. After going through this for a bit, you find out who is sending these enemies after you to begin with, and it's a clone of yourself. How and why there's a clone of Shepard walking around I won't spoil, but that in itself lets you know how crazy this DLC is. But beyond that, the most important thing to come out of this DLC is that you receive the best pistol in the game, the M11 suppressor. This gun is absolutely insane, as it has a 4-time damage multiplier on headshots, which can pretty much one-shot the majority of the enemies. The only caveat is that it doesn't have much ammo, but that can be mitigated by adding on a weapon mod. This gun saved me in some of the late game sections, as there's swarms of enemies with brutes and atlases where that gun came in clutch. Once you get this gun, you won't want to use anything else, trust me. Including the other missions, everything about these DLCs was just perfect. The dialogue, interactions, and action sequences are all unforgettable. Just like the base game, there was times I found myself like, what is going on? This is crazy. But all of that just adds to how much fun this game was. If you're wondering, yes, these DLCs are tied into the story, so it's not just all irrelevant missions that you go through, but rather ones with meaning behind them. Again, I stress that if you got people killed in the previous games, certain characters won't be available for these DLCs, but I'm sure you could have guessed that. If everyone is alive, then these hit so much more. The different areas you explore while going through these DLCs really give these their own identity, keeping them separate but not too far off from the base game. It is worth noting that a lot of the Citadel missions are just errands, requiring you to go to a planet and probe it for something, then bring it back to a person. That was a little repetitive, but I didn't mind too much. But if you're someone who doesn't like those kind of missions, just be prepared to skip those because you're not going to be interested. Remember, you do get war assets for completing those missions though. Just a heads up. Nonetheless, if you went back in time to release, I would have told everybody that I could to buy these DLCs because they take what's already a great game and make it even better. These DLC packs really are that good. Overall, Mass Effect 3 was phenomenal. Going into this, I knew I would like it, but I didn't think I would end up loving it as much as I did. The game feels like the culmination of what came before it, and it did a great job of putting a bow on a lot of characters and their arcs, making everything feel complete, like drawing a definitive line in the sand. Even with a couple things I didn't care for, this game was a blast to play from the very beginning. Even though this game isn't perfect, I'm going to give it a perfect score of 10. Yes, this game does have a couple flaws, but those flaws are so minor for me I can't deduct points away from my final score. I love this game so much and I wish I would have played it sooner. After finishing both the base game and the DLCs, I don't understand how someone can think that 2 is better than 3 when 3 does just about everything better than 2. But even if you do think that, that would be a valid take, as all 3 games in this trilogy are great, it's just a matter of which you like the most. When BioWare releases Mass Effect 4, I hope they pull a lot of inspiration from this game because I think this is their best work in regards to this entire series. What did you think about Mass Effect 3? Did you play this back in 2012? Or are you hearing about this for the first time? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to watch one of my other reviews right here.